being with us during this break. And we are now back at 4 o'clock. And with items 52 through 54 to be taken together. Jose Oseguera.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public. Item 52 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Interstate 105 Express Lanes project. Caltrans determined that impacts could be reduced to less than significant levels. Staff recommends your approval.
Okay. Justin, is there any public comment on 52 at this time?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioners, Commissioner Liu, do you wish to speak?
Sure. I know that the idea is to add express lanes on this freeway, and I know that we're going to use, Metro's going to use that money to help pay for the project and then invest other revenue in benefits to the local community. I was just wondering if we get some information about what the expected timelines are for that and how much money might be invested and when.
Yes. You're muted, Mr. Oseguera.
I see, yes, Commissioner. We have, oh, okay. I believe they,
Have they unmuted? Have they muted you and cut you off? Are you back? Great.
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, terrific. Sorry about that. But we have someone here from Metro who would like to address that question by the name of Mark Linsenmayer. Doug, can you please let him go live?
All right, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Mark Linsenmayer. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for the Express Lanes at Metro. Yeah, so our plan is with all of our corridors is to reinvest any net toll revenue proceeds back into the corridor, and that would certainly be our plan on this as well. Right now we're hopeful that we can get this open and operational by 2028 in time for the LA Olympics. At that point, if we do have sufficient toll revenues available, we would be available to reinvest those into the corridor at that time. I guess conditioned on what our bond indenture might look like if we do need to go to the capital markets through a TIFIA loan or other investments. But realistically, as soon as we could get the toll revenues flowing, we could start to reinvest into the corridor.
And you don't have a particular timeline or amount of money that you expect. And I know you've done this with the 110 and the 10. How has that played out? Can we use that as an example? Is that going to be kind of representative of what we could expect for this year?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I can look at that separately. So yeah, the 10 and the 110 obviously was paid for entirely with a grant. So we didn't have any debt or any bond requirements that would otherwise restrict that funding. To date, we've paid right around $80 million in transit support, a little bit less, I think 78 million, we'll call it, in direct transit subsidies for the Metro Silver Line, the Foothill Silver Streak, and other transit projects. We've issued just less than 50 million on various net toll revenue grant programs to a number of projects on each of those corridors, as you indicated. So we've had an active program for that on the 10 and the 110. Looking prospectively on the 105. And again, it's still early days, so it's hard to make a commitment. But our net toll revenue forecast is over the course of 40 years. Metro long-range planning often uses 40 years as the window. We anticipate somewhere south of $6 billion in total gross revenue, and about half of that, 2.9 billion, will be used to provide operations and maintenance and rehab and rehabilitation on the corridor for the roadbed, along with the debt service. So we would have in excess of 2.9 billion over the life of the project to reinvest in the corridor on other mobility projects, including transit, active transportation, and roadway projects.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful information. Thank you.
Yes, and that's a very significant amount of funding. And you were saying that your anticipation is opening by 2028, repaying the bonds, and so the funding over the life of the project that might be available on the public side would begin, say, 2030?
I think that's reasonable, right? We typically would expect a ramp-up period of around 2 years is what, we would typically assume. Obviously, we have experienced users and an experienced operation, so we might be able to get there sooner, but I think 2 years is a reasonable window for that, yes.
Okay. Thank you. And I wanted to ask one question about bus service. Because the Silver Line and Silver Streak have been so extraordinary on the 110 express lanes and 10 express lanes, what's your vision about bus service along the 105 corridor?
On the 105, we do have median running light rail, right? We have the C line, which was opened originally as the green line that runs almost the entire length of that corridor. We would certainly want to continue investments on that corridor. So, Metro, we would probably go back and ask our operations if they wanted to run redundant bus service adjacent to that. Whether that made sense from an operations standpoint, but we would likely rely on the light rail to do that. Certainly any other local providers in Norwalk or in other cities along the corridor that wanted to provide, what we call local municipal service, we would obviously make that accommodation and would be happy to support those transit programs through our net toll revenue grant program.
That's great. And I just one last question, because this is such an important corridor in the industrial areas and to the LAX airport. What's going to be your policy on the 2-axle cargo trucks and using the express lanes?
So again, thank you for that. So the 2-axle cargo trucks are currently allowed in our express lanes on the 10 and the 110. Our anticipation would be to have a similar policy to accommodate that on the 105. So we do think that that size vehicle would be well suited to use the express lanes as express lanes on those corridors. And of course, if there's HOV requirements that they meet, they could also use that segment of the roadway for free.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have no further questions. Commissioners, are there any other questions you may have? If not,
Madam Chair, we have a written comment on this item.
Okay, thank you.
Hang on one sec. The comment is from Don Jones. Could or would these funds be allocated to housing for homeless or displaced persons?
Would you like me to respond to that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Sure. Again, this is Mark Linsenmeyer with Express Lanes for the record. Right now, the way our legislation is set up and the way our board policy is that it's to improve mobility along the corridor. So our net toll revenue grant program typically addresses the three categories of active transportation projects, walking and bicycling primarily, along with some others. Some of the arterial and roadway improvements that I mentioned earlier, and transit. And so those are the three main categories that we do. So at this time, we don't have any sort of improvements identified for homeless or for other shelter options. But certainly we'd be willing to consider that if legislation pointed us in that direction.
Thank you very much. Since we're taking items 52 through 54 together, let's move on to item 53, seeing the complete public hearing on 52. Say?
All right, thank you. Item 53 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Phoenix Terminal Rail Yard Expansion and Modernization Project. The Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners adopted a statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends approval, including a change to the record to reflect the City of San Pedro will be replaced with the City of Los Angeles. This correction has been added to the change list and will be reflected in the final version available at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, we have to be very careful because we can't give the people in San Pedro the idea of forming their own city. They may well do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, item 54 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Otay Mesa Community Plan Update Project. The San Diego City Council adopted a statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends approval of items 53 and 54.
That's great. And when you recommend 53, you're recommending 53 as amended. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so if we could have a motion on 52, 53, 54.
I moved, Eager. Yay, I got in.
We have a second?
Inman.
Thank you. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Eager,
Hi.
Commissioner Grisby,
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe,
Aye.
Commissioner Liu,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni, I think we may have accidentally muted him. Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Okay, with that, we are going to hold 55, 56, 57, item 13, and 58 till tomorrow, but we are going to take up item 59, the update on the last chance grade project on the US 101. Tim? Tim, we just lost you. I see Matt Brady.
Sorry, I'm on.
There you're back.
Yes, my apologies. Commissioners, tab 59 is an information item. The Last Chance Grade Project is an effort to identify long-term solution to address instability and roadway failure on a three-mile segment of US 101 in Del Norte County. Caltrans District 1 Director Matt Brady and Project Manager Jamie Mattioli are here to provide a status update on the project. I will now turn it over to Matt and Jamie.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I am Matt Brady, Caltrans District 1 Director for the North Coast of California. Today, Jamie Mattioli, the Project Manager for the Last Chance Grade Project, and I are here to provide our annual update to the Commission regarding the progress that we have made on the Last Chance Grade Project in Del Norte County on US 101. We have had tremendous support for the project from the community, the various stakeholders, and elected officials such as Congressman Jared Huffman, State Senator Mike McGuire, Assembly Member Jim Wood, local tribes, and the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors, just to name a few. The primary message from all of these groups has been to find a way to deliver this project as soon as possible, but to make sure that the stakeholders play a leading role in deciding the scope of the project. Just to remind the Commission, we currently have funding programmed in the shop for only the PA, or project approval and environmental document phase. In partnership with our primary consultant, HNTB, we have made good progress on getting closer to the ultimate solution and have narrowed the number of alternatives that we will be studying after consulting with our stakeholders, which will reduce the planned scheduled time to achieve the PA&ED milestone by 1 year. Jamie Mattioli will cover that shortly in his presentation. Next slide, please, Douglas. As a reminder of how fragile things are at this location, we started another emergency project in March of this year for $17 million after a major slide occurred along the existing alignment. Much of this emergency slide work is expected to be completed by the end of this month. As Executive Director Weiss and Director Omashakin mentioned in the reports, in order to get the work done expeditiously, We've had to close the route twice a day during the week for 4 hours at a time, except on Fridays when we have had a single 4-hour closure. That has lasted about 2 months. At other times, we have had one-way traffic control in place with up to 30-minute closures. And again, this is in relations to the emergency work. All of these closures have had an impact on commerce, health and safety, law enforcement, and employment. Next slide, please, Douglas. In addition to this, we have had ongoing wall construction projects that will stabilize the existing alignment, at least temporarily, as the major slide planes are deep-seated. These walls will help with the more shallow-seated slides. Since 1997, Caltrans, we have spent over $100 million to maintain this existing 3-mile alignment that is the sole all-weather connection between Del Norte County and the rest of California and is often referred to as the lifeline. Now, I would like to turn the presentation over to Jamie Mattioli, the project manager.
Thanks, Matt. And we're happy to be here to provide this update on Last Chance Grade. This is our annual update, and we have some significant accomplishments to report. In previous conversations with the Commission, you've asked us to find ways to speed up the project and save money, and I'm happy to report that we did find a way to do that. And I know we have a few new commissioners, so I just want to take a moment, please, to get everyone oriented to the project. Our project is located on Highway 101, just south of Crescent City, and I'd like to call your attention to those 4. Could we have the next slide, please? Those 4 dashed lines you'll see on the next slide, which represent the boundaries of these large, deep-seated, active landslides in the project area. The highway sits within these landslides, and it's sandwiched between the Pacific Ocean on the west and this ocean of trees on the east. And those trees are old growth redwoods. They're within Redwood National State Park and State Park System, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This area is home to sensitive species. It's the ancestral territory of 5 tribal governments. The highway has been sinking and sliding west ever since the alignment was placed here in 1937, which has led to these high maintenance and repair costs. And Caltrans has 2 jobs here. We need to, 1, keep the highway open and safe, and 2, find a long-term solution. Next slide, please. So over the next few minutes, I'll just cover the context, the schedule, what's happened recently, and then I'll discuss the 2 alternatives that we are studying. And finally, we'll answer any questions that there are. Next slide, please. So this first photo on the left was taken in November 2019 when CTC staff, commissioners, and others toured the location before a CTC town hall in Crescent City that evening. And later, commissioners attended a public town hall just on Last Chance Grade. The second photo on the right, it's in the same location. It's taken recently, and it shows some of the progress. That 3rd beam from the top that's circled is in the same location, and the road has now been lifted about 16 feet here, where we put in a retaining wall on the downhill side. Some of you were at that site in November 19, and I just want to share some of the following work that's been underway since your trip. Matt Brady discussed that landslide that occurred in February when approximately 40,000 cubic yards of material mobilized as a result of a storm in the area. And that resulted in a full closure of the highway and the delays Matt mentioned. Slide material is being removed and disposed of now, and the entire slope is being regraded to make a stable configuration, and the cable systems are being installed to prevent future slope failure. That total expected cost would be $14 million. Several other projects have been ongoing in response to damage from 2015, 2017, and 2018 storm events. To date, the 3 different emergency contracts have already been completed with $35 million worth of work to repair the damage from those storms. One remaining $14 million contract will repair the last remaining damage, and it's on schedule to be completed next year, weather permitting. That work involves replacing 3 damaged retaining walls and building 3 new walls. So that's well over $60 million that would be spent to repair storm damage since 2015. And it's notable that if no new additional damage occurs after this work is finished, that'll be the first time in 9 years that we'll have Last Chance Grade open to two-way traffic. Next slide, please. So we mentioned that landslide that occurred in February. This is just showing the context of that landslide. So the map on the left is a map of the landslides. In red, those are the active landslides. And in orange, those are like historic, dormant, ancient landslides. So the blue box shows the location of that recent landslide. And then in green, that's the actual kind of boundary where the landslide occurred. So you can just see how small that is compared to the entire landslide complex. And it represents, with damage and impacts from that small area, you get a sense of the risk to the entire community. Next slide, please. And that's based on the fact that there's no good detour. So if there's a full closure of the road, this is the detour map. It's a 6-hour minimum detour if you're traveling from Eureka to Crescent City. And if you're traveling from Klamath to Crescent City, it's about an 8-hour detour. So if you are a tribal member and you send your kids to school in Crescent City, it would be 8 hours if there's a closure.
Wow.
And yeah, in 2018, an economic study estimated those costs if there was a full closure for 1 year. The next slide, please. So our job of finding the long-term solution has 3 major objectives: find this long-term safe and reliable roadway to reduce the maintenance costs while we protect the economy and natural resources and cultural resources. That comes with 3 major challenges and major risks. Because of the environmental sensitivity and complexity at the location, we have this risk of environmental litigation that could slow down the progress or delay progress or stop progress. And because we need to maintain partnerships with diverse groups with different viewpoints, we could come to an impasse and not be able to decide how we're going to mitigate for project impacts, including impacts to old growth redwoods, and that could delay the project. And finally, because of the complex dynamic geology and the scale of the hazard, we could make new geotechnical discoveries down the road that changes our thinking, changes the scope, and makes us repeat some steps, and that would delay the project. The next slide, please. So this just shows the timeline that we presented last year, and then the timeline that we now have. We had the final environmental document date expected to be completed in 2026, and now we've moved that up to 2025. Next slide, please. And how do we do that? Really, it's thanks to this alternatives analysis process, where we narrowed down the alternatives from 7 to 2, and those 2 alternatives have much smaller footprints, require less studies, less complex studies. And that saved us a year on the schedule and $10 million in cost of studies. We've also completed phase 4 of geotechnical studies. We flew drilling equipment using helicopters into old growth redwood forest in state parks, and we completed those investigations, and we're now monitoring the data. We're also on track with all the environmental and engineering studies that we need to begin preparing that draft environmental document next year, 2022. Next slide, please. And just checking in on the budget, Matt mentioned that we only have the environmental phase funded for $50 million. We've currently spent $19 million to date, and most of that is on the geotechnical investigations, with about $10 billion spent on the geotech part. Next slide, please. And just digging in a bit to that alternatives analysis process. So we had our experts analyze those 7 build alternatives based on criteria and performance measures that were selected and determined by our stakeholder working groups, our 4 working groups. And those 4 working groups came together and they provided input, and they validated and supported that process. And the result, which ends up eliminating those 5 alternatives and selecting alternatives F X. Or rather, F and X are the alternatives that will remain for further study. This plot on the bottom of the screen shows the total score ranking of the alternatives, and here it's like golf scores. The higher the score, the worse. So X and F are clear winners in this case, and there's a large gap between those alternatives and the remaining alternatives. So alternative A1 would have to get significantly better to be able to compete with alternative X. And those 5 on the right, they also have much larger environmental footprints, as we mentioned. The next slide, please. So this alternatives analysis process received some high praise from some of our most litigious critics, and they were very generous with their praise and support for the process. You can read the full article or hear the podcast by going to our website, lastchancegrade.com. The next slide, please. And just getting into the alternatives a bit, these are the two that were remain for further study. Alternative F, it's the tunnel bypass. It avoids the broken formation landslide using a tunnel to completely bypass that area. It's a higher cost alternative, but it has lower risk and it has the smallest environmental footprint, so the lowest impacts. Alternative X is an approach to mitigate the landslide, and it has lower costs, but it has higher geotechnical risks. Next slide, please. So just a look at X and what it does, it's distinct from the current approach where we manage the landslide and we perform repairs as needed. As failure occurs, we come in and repair at spot locations. X is an end-to-end mitigation of the landslide and includes a dewatering system to pull water away, a retreat to gain some real estate, and some walls uphill and downhill to accommodate that retreat. Next slide, please. Alternative F, again, avoids that landslide. It's higher cost and lower risk. It has the least environmental impacts because those impacts are limited to the 2 tunnel approaches where you approach the portal or opening of the tunnel. And next slide, please. And in summary, we've shortened the schedule by 1 year. We've saved $10 million by reducing the number of alternatives. We have strong stakeholder support for the process to reduce the number of alternatives. We continue to maintain support and engagement of the public, local governments, partner agencies, elected officials, and we're working very hard to keep that support. In closing, I'd like to thank you for your attention and support. We look forward to providing more updates in the future, and it will take all of us continuing to work together to find a safe, smart, and sustainable solution for Last Chance Grade. And we're happy to take any questions.
Very impressive presentation. It's always good to see saving money and saving time in a project. So I'm checking with Justin as to, we have no public comment on 59. Commissioners, any comments from you? Commissioner Inman?
I just want to say thank you for the update. As one of those commissioners that was on the last field trip of the CTC, totally appreciate the challenges that you all have to figure out how to navigate through. But I think this project would be one that should be a candidate for a pilot on our AB 1282. Once we decide whichever path, or perhaps even in the decision-making process, it just seems to me that this one would be absolutely prime for getting all of our partners together early on and try to take some of the progress that we've made on 1282 and apply it, probably bookends both of our Highway 1 projects, whether it's Commissioner Kehoe's Del Mar Bluffs or the Last Chance. I think probably both of them are going to be good candidates for figuring out solutions collectively. Thank you.
Thank you. And with no further comments, this is an information item, so we thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And Tim, we'll have you go to item 60.
Thank you. Commissioners, tab 60 is an information item. In June of 2020, the Commission adopted a $100 million Complete Streets reservation as part of the 2020 State Highway Operation and Protection Program for the purposes of augmenting projects with additional Complete Streets features for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Susan Lindsay, the Caltrans Complete Streets Program Manager, is here to give an update on the status of the Complete Streets reservation. I'd like to turn it over to Susan if you're there.
I'm here.
Okay.
So, good afternoon, everyone. We may be the last agenda item of the day. This presentation's on the Complete Streets reservation. It's the $100 million reservation that many of you are familiar with began shortly over a year ago. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about the Complete Streets reservation, the reservation summary. We're going to spotlight 3 projects for you, talk about the programming status of all of the projects in the reservation, and what our next steps are as an agency. Next slide, please. So the overview of the Complete Streets reservation, it was a $100 million fund reservation in the SHOP, was for the 2020 SHOP cycle. 34 projects were identified all across the 12 districts of Caltrans. They, are spread around the state. This was a one-time funding measure prior to the development of our Complete Streets target in the 21 SHSMP. Next slide, please. This is a brief overview of our process around the 100 million reservation. So a team of sustainability, design, project delivery, landscape architecture, and planning got together and solicited these projects from the districts. They were scored based on a set of criteria, including potential for increased connectivity, which is really projects that close gaps, remove barriers, or increase mobility. Local alignment, which was improvements located in local, regional, or statewide plans. Public engagement, including a whole stakeholder engagement process that identified the improvements as a priority for the communities. Located in or benefiting a disadvantaged community, which were projects so for disadvantaged community, I'll pause here and say that these projects use the same criteria that we use for our active transportation plan, which was the median household income, reduced price meals, the CalEnviro Screen 3.0, or a regional definition. And then safety, where they had a documented bicycle or pedestrian collisions in the vicinity, and the projects included safety countermeasures to address these issues. So this was the scoring criteria for these 34 projects. The criteria was developed in coordination with our external partners, which is our Cal Walk, Bike, and TAP Committee, and approved by Caltrans Executive Board in July 2020. The review team scored these projects based on the approved criteria. Projects that met multiple criteria were elevated in our priority list, and we were additionally screened projects for their deliverability inside the 2020 SHOP cycle, because this reservation dollar amount is attached to that SHOP cycle. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a summary of what's moving forward and what we're able to do with this money. 12 projects include separated all ages bicycle facilities. 16 projects have new sidewalks that close critical gaps in pedestrian access. 26 projects are in Main Street locations, and 2 projects include road diet elements for community traffic calming. Just to give you a little bit of a scope on this, the 12 projects that included separated bike facilities, that was approximately 75,000 linear feet of new bicycle facility. The sidewalk gap closure included approximately 50,000 linear feet of new sidewalk, and the 2 road diet projects are located in Vallejo and Coalinga. Next slide, please. This is a summary of how the projects broke down based on the screening criteria. So 70% of the projects, or 24 out of 34 projects, are located partially or fully inside a disadvantaged community. 67% of the projects, or 23 out of 34 projects, have a history of collision and include a safety component. And 91%, or 31 out of 34 projects, were already identified in local or regional plans. Next slide, please. These are the 3 projects I'm going to give you a a briefer look at. One is Covello. It's in Mendocino County on State Route 162. One is in Eureka. It's their main street called Broadway in Humboldt County on Highway 101. And one is in Watsonville, Santa Cruz County on State Route 129. One of the reasons we're highlighting these three projects is because they all ranked very high in supporting needs in disadvantaged communities, providing a safety, and being in strongly represented in local policies and plans. Next slide, please. So the the Covello project, State Route 162, you all have seen this project before because it's already come through for allocation. This project's the highest priority project for District 1 and will build a Class 1 multi-use bike path adjacent to State Route 162, provides key connectivity to low-income tribal communities where 25% of the students rely on walking and biking. There's no alternate facilities for them to access school. Project highlights for this: it's fully inside serving a disadvantaged community. The median income is $38,000. 96% of the students in these school districts qualify for free and reduced price meals. Regarding safety, the bicycle and pedestrians use vehicle lanes, which are shown here in these photos. Speed average 40 to 55 miles an hour, and they've had multiple bike and ped collisions. This is providing a fully separated facility. Regarding local alignment, it was the top priority in Mendocino Regional Non-Motorized Report and the local multimodal plan. Next slide, please. This slide is really highlighting just how much community involvement was involved in this project and also how much community involvement it takes to get to a design solution that works for these communities. So the reservation funds are supporting capital complete streets improvements, and in some cases they're also supporting support costs for the public outreach and the design process needed to come up with these solutions. So this project had quite a bit of local involvement. Next slide, please. This is an overview and a plan view and a cross section of the changes. So in the upper image, you see the highway and you see an adjacent street crossing. The yellow obviously is the new striped crosswalks coming in, and then you can kind of see the gray new separated facility along the top. And if you look in the cross section, you get an idea that, you know, there'll be a new 8-foot paved travel path separate from the highway with shoulders. There's a buffer between the separated facility and the highway. And this is a pretty typical cross section. This project is long and it has some complicated areas, but this kind of typically represents the new cross section available for multimodal users. Next slide, please. This is the Broadway project in Eureka. This is basically Eureka's main street. Let's see. Project will add bike and ped facilities to US 101. It's currently the busiest main street in District 1 at Caltrans, and it ranks highest on the Office of Traffic Safety's bike and pedestrian collision list. Currently, there are no bike facilities and only 3 pedestrian crossings in a 1.3 mile stretch. And you can see in this lower picture of actually both these photos, there's a very discontinuous experience for pedestrians and bicycles along this route currently. Fully supporting a disadvantaged community. The median income is $43,000. Local alignment, it's a high regional priority identified in numerous corridor plans and feasibility studies, really going back to more than 10 years. Next slide, please. So this slide is just to give everybody a brief overview of the layers of facilities being brought into this Main Street corridor. It's not so much to kind of pick it apart, but you can see there's quite a bit happening here. There's upgraded in the pedestrian crossings. There's changes in the bus and transit system. They're elevating bike paths. There's potential street tree planting. I mean, there's just quite a few changes happening throughout this project. And I want to say this is a standalone Complete Streets project. It's being brought forth at this meeting for allocation. Amendment. It's at this meeting for amendment. Next slide, please. And then this just gives you an idea. Here's a before and after, the types of improvements that you'll see on the street when this project's complete. Next slide. So the last project I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about is Watsonville, State Route 129. It's in District 5. The pictures shown are downtown Watsonville. The project, there was an original CAP-M project coming through this location on State Route 129. The reservation dollars allowed them to expand that project to State Route 152 and also add continuous bike and pedestrian facilities throughout the city. Watsonville is considered one of the most dangerous cities in California for walking and biking. It's fully inside a disadvantaged community. 88% of their students qualify for free and reduced price meals. The city is ranked very, very highly for bike and pedestrian collisions. Between 2011 and 2017, they had 209 pedestrian collisions and 130 bicycle collisions. And when you Google this city, you really get a sense of that, because when you're trying to look at their bike and ped media, there's tremendous amount of accident data. Local alignment improvements were identified in their Safe Route to Schools plan, the Regional Transportation Plan, and the District 5 Active Transportation Plan. Next slide, please. So this is showing the type and scope of the improvements that'll be coming into this route. There'll be upgraded pedestrian crossings. There'll be Class 2 bike facilities. In some locations, there'll be bike facilities that are improved upon from that. Next slide, please. This is, again, the pictures of the kinds of community involvement and outreach that have gone on in this project. They did a lot of community outreach at their local farmers market, which is downtown adjacent to this project. The map in the middle shows a lot of kind of red squares. Those are all the different elementary and middle schools and high schools that are adjacent to these two state routes. So there's 6 or 7 schools that are just immediately adjacent to this entire area. And one of the big discussions on this project was what level of bike facility to provide. But because they have a tremendous amount of low-income residents also living on these routes that didn't have alternative parking and are using their vehicles to commute to work in higher income communities, they really worked with the community to find out what kind of bike and parking facilities were appropriate, and were able to come up with something that's an improvement but still livable for their community. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a map. It's the programming status, but on the map, it shows the distribution of the 34 projects across the state. There's projects in every district. 30 projects have been amended into the SHOP. 1 project is at this meeting for amendment. That's the Broadway project. 3 remaining projects will come in for allocation later in the process, because those were existing projects that won't need those funds until allocation. There are a few other projects that'll come in for supplemental funds requests just based on our normal process. But that makes up the 34 projects that are part of this reservation. Next slide, please. This is the delivery status, the number of projects that are coming into construction each fiscal year. So for 2021, 2 of these projects are entering construction. In 2022, 10 of these projects are entering construction. In 2023, 4 of these projects are entering construction. And then in 2024, the remaining 18 are entering construction. And we didn't target particular fiscal years for delivery. We were looking for the best projects that met the most needs throughout this 4-year period. Next slide. So what's next for Caltrans? We have a new asset manager for Complete Streets and Project Delivery. That's me. Identified subject matter experts in all of the districts and the design divisions to support the design and development of all these projects through design. We are undertaking California Active Transportation, or CAP plans, for all 12 districts. We have several that are complete. We're working on the rest. And those will inform the performance targets and project development for the 23 SHSMP. The CAP plan data is feeding into the state multimodal plans, the state bike and ped plans, which are feeding into the mode plans, which are feeding into the CAPT for people that are tracking that document process. Next slide, please. We also have performance targets for fix existing and build new in the 21 SHSMP. Complete Streets is a new asset for us in our 21 SHSMP. We're tracking 6 complete street asset types with performance targets. We have crosswalks, sidewalks, bikeways, class 1, class 2 buffered, and class 4. And the funding for these is there's $205 million for fix existing and $1,384 million for build new. And the breakdown on that is for the fix existing, we have 50 million currently in our pipeline and 155 million coming in the outer years for our 21 SHSMP. And then for the build new, we have 428 million currently in our pipeline and 956 million coming in for our SHSMP. So we have, so we went from this 100 million reservation in the 2020 shop cycle to a significantly larger measure allocation in our 21 SHSMP. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my status update. I'd be delighted to try to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Mitch, I see you popping up, so what would you like to give as input into this item?
Susan, I think this is great. I really like the way this is going, but as you might expect, we look at some of the details and kind of get into the weeds. I noticed one project on the list really was just a shoulder widening, and while as a cyclist and a pedestrian, I have been on plenty of roads with no shoulders and would appreciate a shoulder widening kind of seems like you're just phoning it in as a complete streets project.
Yeah, Mitch, I can speak a little bit to that. We do have quite a few locations throughout the state where, we don't own the right of way that our facilities are on, or we have environmental constraints, we have geographic constraints, and we've got a significant amount of roadway miles where shoulder widening is the only facility that's really feasible right now at Caltrans, and we don't have a way to provide a separated facility. And we've got a lot of facilities that don't have any shoulder currently. And internally we're working through a process to try to figure out how we want to move forward on these types of tight constraints long term. But I do think that we have locations where shoulder widening and maybe not even shoulder widening to an 8-foot standard, but a reduced shoulder widening will end up being the best we can do geographically or environmentally or right away. We didn't put performance targets on class 3 bikeways, and we didn't do that on purpose because we don't want to encourage class 3 bikeway as the minimum facility. We're really pushing performance targets for the other types of bikeways. And I think we'll continue down that path, but there are going to be times when that's the only feasible alternative. So we are looking at that. I do appreciate the comment. You're not alone.
I totally understand the constraints. I hope if it's an 8-foot shoulder going in, you're looking at, well, would it be, better to have a 4-foot bike lane and in there. But I guess my question is, should that really be considered a complete streets project? Was that really the intent of the reservation? Yes, it makes it safer, but lots of things, lots of byproducts of shop projects should make it safer for bike and pedestrians. So we can continue this offline and talk more about some of the projects. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Well, thank you. This is a very thorough discussion. I want to check whether or not we have any public comment on this item. Justin?
Chair Norton, I see no attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time.
Great, thank you. Okay, and commissioners, anyone wishing to speak? Thank you. If not, this is a informational item, so we will move on to item 63. We'll save 61 for tomorrow. And 63 is the 2021 report of STIP balances, county and interregional shares. Teresa? Thank you, Susan, very much.
Tab 63 is an information item. This item is the 2021 report of STIP county and interregional share balances otherwise known as the Orange Book. And it is an orange book, really. So, so whenever you hear the Orange Book, that is really what it is. That's what we call it. We're going to trademark it. Statute requires the commission keep a record of county share balances and to make the balances through the end of each fiscal year available to regions no later than August 15th. This year's report was transmitted to the regions on August 2nd. The report has been posted on the commission's website as well. For each county share and for the interregional share, the Orange Book lists the shares available, including all adjustments to those shares and reconciliation to the previous report. Each project program from the shares, including any allocations made within the last fiscal year, and the unprogrammed share balance remaining. We do occasionally find and correct errors in our records, which is one reason for sharing them in this manner. As always, staff will work with any agency that has questions about the data on this report. Madam Chair, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have, we have no public comment on 63. Are there any commissioners who wish to speak on this item? If not, this is also an informational item, so thank you very much, Teresa. And with that, we're going to go to item 64, the shop amendments for approval, which is an action item. John Prey.
I apologize. Can you hear me now?
We can.
I'm sorry. I'm on my phone, which I'm usually not. Okay. Item 64. Oh, and I'm not on camera either. I apologize for that. I am having internet difficulties. Item 64 is an action item. Item 64 is an action item to approve amendments to the 2020 shop. And these shop amendments will revise 5 projects that are currently programmed in the 2020 shop, and will also add a total of 18 new projects to the 2020 shop. Of the 18 new projects, 9 of them are major damage restoration projects. 1 is a safety project. 6 are stormwater projects. 1 is an operational improvement project. And 1 is a new complete streets project that's being amended in using the reservation. And this is the Broadway project that Susan was just telling us about. So staff has reviewed these shop amendments, and we find that they're consistent with the shop guidelines as well as the asset management plan, and recommends approval of item 64.
Okay. No public comment at this time? Do we have any commissioners who wish to speak on these shop amendments? If not, could we entertain a motion?
So move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Davis? Do we have a second? Frisbee?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much. And Commissioners, since the rest of our items involve groups of items, we're going to adjourn for tonight and resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you very much. This is the end of day 1, and we look forward to everyone coming back on day 2 tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you.